What's going on, knife people? It's OT, the Lord of Knives, and today I'm super amped to show you my buck knives collection. Buck knives are super dear to me. It was my very first quality knife I ever bought, and it put me on the path of collecting quality knives, which has become quite a passion of mine. And every time I go into the wild, or most times when I go into the wild, I have a buck knife on my hip, and I entrust my life with that knife, and they've never failed me. So I love buck knives, and I'm here to show you my buck knives. We're gonna start where it all started for me. This here is the Buck 546 open season Skinner. And I originally bought this knife so that I can have some protection, because here in Canada it's not that easy to get a gun. It's actually pretty hard to get a gun. But yeah, I wanted some protection. I wanted a big knife that I can open with one hand and like a finger guard here. And this is the knife I landed on. I didn't know anything about knives at the time. I just wanted a big knife that can protect me, and this knife has done so. I'm not saying I've ever pulled it out on anyone, but yeah, this knife served its purpose. I don't use it that much anymore because the handle is massive, it's missing a screw, and the pocket clip is really shaky. But regardless, this was my very first knife, the Buck 546 open Skinner, or open season Skinner. And I glossed over this knife here, the king of knives in my opinion, the Buck 110. I bought this like maybe a week after I bought this, because I realized that the Buck 110, it's just such a great knife, and I almost missed greatness with this knife, you know? So I went back to the store and I bought the Buck 110, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, because I really do love this knife. My most successful YouTube video currently is my Buck 110 video, and I really do enjoy reading all the comments and just being a part of the knife community and seeing how much other people love their Buck 110. I think it's the greatest knife ever. It has great ergonomics, solid lockup, and it's just such a good knife. It's my favorite knife, and this one is from way back in 2015. So, Buck 110. All right, next knife is the Buck folding Selkirk small. It is the Buck 835. I think this is the most underrated buck knife. It has micarta handles. It's a liner lock with an open construction. It's just pretty smooth, and I feel like this knife is just doesn't get the recognition it deserves. Like it's a solid knife. It's a great size. I feel like the handle feels good. Full flat grind is good. So that there is the Buck folding Selkirk small, the Buck 835 with the deep Perry pocket clip. I think it's a solid choice. The next buck I have for you guys is the Buck 722 Spitfire. Is it the 722? Yeah, this is the Buck 722 Spitfire. This one, it doesn't have a pocket clip because here in Canada it's pretty much cold for half of the year, and I don't mind having no pocket clip. I just throw it in my jacket pocket. But this knife is solid. It is a back lock, which means it has a solid lockup. It has like a 3-inch blade. I'm not 100% sure on the exact specs, but there's some pretty unaggressive jimping back here. The ergonomics, although it's super thin, the ergonomics are pretty darn good on this knife. The Buck 722 Spitfire is a solid knife. This here is the Buck 301 Stockman with the rosewood handle and the brass bolsters, brass pins here. And this knife just looks gorgeous. It is a large Stockman with the nice clip point blade, and then the Warncliffe blade, and the spade blade. If you like a Buck 110, then you will most definitely like the Buck 301 Stockman, in my opinion. This here is the Buck 110 Slim, and this knife is what started this whole YouTube thing for me. It was my very first YouTube video. It did inspire me to just start making YouTube videos and to start talking about knives, because it's just such a solid knife, and it's thin, it has a deep carry pocket clip, the thumb studs allow you to actuate the blade with one hand, but this Buck 110 Slim, in my opinion, is a great knife, and I feel like you guys should definitely check it out. Alright, so this knife is the Buck 311 Kingsman. And it is only sold here in Canada in a store we call Canadian Tire. It is a super budget knife. This is about, what, 15 bucks. It has a liner lock, opening instruction, deep carry pocket clip with a awkward thumb hole. I can get it to go pretty good. But yeah, this is the Canadian Buck 311 Kingsman. Solid little budget knife, and I like it. This here is the Buck Haxby. In the last couple years, Buck has really been trying to go in a new direction with their modern folders, and you can see the difference between this knife and the rest of these knives. This knife has the carbon fiber handle, and they did something different with this pivot. Is like bronze washers in the pivot or something, because that knife just flies out of there. It has a full flat grind, quite a lengthy blade. I really love the blade shape on this knife. I do enjoy the generous handle. I enjoy the flipper that turns into a finger guard. I enjoy the blade shape. I just enjoy this knife. All right, now let's talk about the fixed blades. My very first fixed blade was the Buck 119. This knife was the original bushcraft knife, or the original companion knife. I think it is still a solid choice to this day, with that girthy handle and that 6-inch clip point blade. Out of all the fixed blades I own, this is still the knife I reach for the most. Not because it excels at all these bushcraft tasks. There's other knives that can do better feather sticks. There's other knives that can split wood better, or just carve wood better. There's other knives with like a more robust tip. There's just knives that are better in every way with these new modern fixed blades. But the reason I reach for this one the most is because of how high it rides on the waist. I love the ergonomics for this knife, and just because there's other knives that can do bushcraft tasks better doesn't mean that this knife can't do any of those tasks. I do every type of bushcraft work with this knife, and it's still ticking, still going strong. I love this knife to death, and it is my most used fixed blade, even though I have better fixed blades. But yeah, the Buck 119, I think every knife person who collects fixed blades should have a Buck 119. This here is my most beautiful knife. It is the Buck 102 Woodsman, almost like a smaller version of the Buck 119. The red leather sheath. It's a gorgeous sheath. And man, just take a minute and look at that knife. The cherry wood handle and the brass pommel, or bolster, or whatever you want to call it. Damn, that knife looks good. The knife here has like a bit of an upward swedge, and that's, I feel like, to just give you more control over the knife when you're doing detailed work, like doing like notches or doing like feather sticking or just more detailed stuff. It really does feel like I have more control over it with that slight upward angle, and it's just like a little 4-inch knife. If I was a country boy, I would put this knife on my hip every single day, but I work and live in the city, and there's something about this handle, it feels amazing. Like when I first bought it, I thought the handle was really small, but man, when you get it in your hand, it just doesn't want to leave. When I go to like a cottage or a fishing trip and I know I'm not going to be asking much of my fixed blade, this is the knife I reach for, because it's just gorgeous and it feels good every time you pull it out and look at it and use it. But the Buck 102 Woodsman is a great knife, one of my favorites. All right, last but not least, I have the Buck 104 Compadre. This knife I've only had for a month, so it looks brand new. And look at that sheath. Man, that sheath looks good. With the new Buck button there. This one also has the 5160 steel with the cobalt Cerakote coating, so that the 5160 spring steel does not rust on you. It is a full tang. It runs all the way through the handle there, has a bit of a finger guard, some jimping on the back. I've only had this for a month and I bought it during the winter, so I have yet to really put it through the works. But man, I can't wait till the snow clears so I can bring this out to the wild and start to beat on it. This knife is like an all-around bushcraft companion knife, and it looks real good. It has the burlap micarta handles, and let me tell you, man, that stuff really feels good. It's super grippy. The handle fills the hand. I really feel like this is the most underrated fixed blade on the market. I don't know why people aren't talking about it as much as they should. The Buck 104 Compadre is really a great knife. I have yet to test it out, but from what I see so far, this knife feels like a premium knife. But I think that's gonna do it for me and my Buck knife collection. If you guys did enjoy the content, like and subscribe. Leave some comments down below. Tell me about your Buck collection. Tell me if you don't like Buck knives. Let's talk knives. But remember, folks, next time you play rock, paper, scissors, choose knife. I'm OT, the Lord of Knives. Stay sharp.